Hey guys, American Pizza Books here. So I hope you all are having a good Christmas season. It's Christmas Eve right now, so I hope you guys are having fun with whatever you're doing this Christmas Eve, and hopefully you guys have a good Christmas tomorrow. But as the year is coming to a close yet again, and seeing as I haven't uploaded anything on here in months, I figured I would do like a top 5 horror novels that I've read this year. Horror is obviously one of the genres that I am the biggest fan of. Horror and fantasy are my two genres that I reach for most of the time. That's not to say that I won't read like science fiction or like science fiction or dystopia or even like historical fiction. Even I've read some good historical fiction, but horror and fantasy are mainly my go-tos, and I really haven't read a lot of like variety of fantasy this year. I've mostly stuck to one high fantasy series this year, and that's because the series is so long, so I haven't really had the chance to start much other fantasy series, which I definitely want to do in 2023. But for this video, I want to talk about what I feel are the best horror novels that I've read this year. I've read quite a few, but obviously out of all of them, these 5 stood out the most. Now, these aren't really in any particular order. I didn't really rank them in terms of which one I think is the very best and which one, just barely managed to get into the top 5. These are just all books that I really enjoyed, for different reasons, and they just happen to make it into this list. So, and plus these aren't just new releases or just old releases. They've been released in different spans of time, different years and stuff. So it's not like a top 5 newest new horror books, or classics or anything. These are just my own personal opinions, and again, to me, the top 5 horror novels in my opinion that I've read this year. So I guess we'll say number one, and again, these aren't ranked in any particular order. This is just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 5 that stood out to me the most. So, but number 1 is The Store by Bentley Little. Now, those of you who have been reading horror for a while, you probably know who Bentley Little is. Bentley Little has been writing and releasing novels since 1990, I believe, and he's written a bunch of stuff. Now, The Store is certainly one of his most popular books. If you ask a Bentley Little fan for their top 5 books by Bentley Little, they will probably have The Store in their top 5. And after reading it this year, I can certainly see why. So basically, like a lot of Bentley Little's novels, and again, I've only read, I think I've said this before, but I've only read 3 of Bentley Little's novels so far. I've read The Haunted, which was my first book that I read by him. I read The Handyman, and this would be my 3rd. I haven't read any more books by him so far. Not because I don't want to, just because there's so many books that I want to read, and there's just so little time, so I want to dedicate time to as many authors as I can. But I definitely want to get into more Bentley Little this year and read several more of his books if I can. But most of Bentley Little's books have a supernatural twist, and with this book, it centers around, well, obviously a store, hence the title. But the store comes into town, and it's actually just called The Store, just The Store. It doesn't really have any special name, just The Store. And it comes into this town, and it basically starts taking over all the businesses. It caters to everything you can imagine, not just groceries, but if you're looking for hardware, they've got it. If you're looking for a salon, they've got it. They've got everything. And this store starts putting all the other small mom and pop businesses out of business, and even some of the more established grocery stores in this town out of business. And it gets to a point to where the store starts privatizing a bunch of stuff, even the police. It's insane. And of course, the main character starts looking into the store a little bit more and finds out that the store, the chain itself, has a very dark history, very dark, shady, history, with just a very gruesome history with killing people who try to say anything or silencing them, and all this crap. It's insane. And then one of his daughters, because there's a family, there's Bill, his wife, and his 2 daughters, and one of them starts working at the store, And you can see the effect it starts to have on her, because she starts acting different, and she starts becoming very, very obedient and loyal to the store, like disturbingly so. And then eventually the other daughter gets a job at the store, and it starts like taking over their lives. And there's like a hazing ritual that one of them has to go to, and it's to go through, and it's really, really chilling and just very disturbing. And then eventually, you know, it gets to a point to where Bill is going to try to infiltrate, you know, this business and try to put an end to it, because a lot of other people who have tried to do something about it have either been taken out, silenced, you know, you get the picture. So it was a phenomenal book, just creepy, great characters. You know, that's the thing. Bentley Little just has a way with characters, like very similar to Stephen King, actually. And I hate to compare, like, you know, horror authors to Stephen King all the time, because I feel like that always inevitably happens. But I've barely been able to find any other author that does characters quite the way that Stephen King does. But Bentley Little, like, really, really does it in a very similar way. Like, these characters they feel like real people. Like, they feel like people you would meet, you know, on the sidewalk, or that you would talk to on a day-to-day basis. Bill, the main character, is very likable, you know, very, very likable, very sympathetic with some of the stuff that he has to go through. The daughter, I believe her name is Shannon. I think Shannon is the younger daughter. I don't remember the name of the older daughter. I don't know if it says on here, but yeah, I don't remember the wife, but I do know that Shannon is one of the daughters. And again, Shannon is a very likable character. Every character in the book and in the family, and even like some of the side characters, are very fleshed out, and they have their own details and their own personalities. And this isn't like, it's not a big book. I think it's like 350 pages or something. Or no, like 400 pages, but in those 400 pages, like, he's able to flesh out these characters so well, and it's just, it really works. It works for the book. The pacing is on point. You know, one thing I like about Bentley Little is that there is no, like, sagging middle or anything, or any parts that feel like they drag on. That's sometimes a problem with, like, Stephen King, again, for example. Like, he has points in his books that will just, like, drag on and on and on, and you don't feel like he's really, like, moving the plot along. With Bentley Little, I don't feel that he really wastes a bunch of time on anything. Like, everything is where it needs to be, in the place that it needs to be, and nothing feels like filler or anything. And that's what I really like about his novels, at least the ones that I've read so far. Maybe I'll read one that does have that issue, but the 3 that I've read so far haven't had that problem. The writing is, you know, it's good writing. It's very good for what it is. You know, if you're looking for, like, a really fine piece of literature, Bentley Little probably isn't the person for you. But if you're just looking for a really, really good, solid, creepy horror story, Bentley Little is the guy for you. So, just everything to me really worked. Something at the end or near the end happens, and it's really, really, really disturbing. Like, at the time, I almost felt like it went too far. But again, this is, like, horror, and you're supposed to be, like, horrified. And I certainly was. I'm not going to spoil what that thing was, but I definitely highly recommend read The Store by Bentley Little. If you've never read Bentley Little before, this is a perfect book to start with. So, The Store by Bentley Little is number 1. Number 2 was Last Days by Adam Neville. Adam Neville is someone that I've really gotten into this year. I've really started reading a bunch of his books. I've read 3 so far. I know his most popular book is The Ritual, which was made into a movie on Netflix. But I've read Last Days, No One Gets Out Alive, and Cunning Folk, which was his newest full-length novel anyways. I believe this one came out in, I want to say it was like 2020, 2019. It's come out within the last few years, I know that, but, or excuse me, actually, no, 2012. So this has been around for a while, actually. But out of all 3, I thought that this was, like, the best to me. Like, I thought that all 3 of the books that I read by him were really solid, but I felt like this one stood out. This was also my first book by Adam Neville, so maybe that's also another reason why, but it's basically about this documentary maker, And he's asked to make this documentary on this cult called the Temple of the Last Days, by this by this man that you find out something about later on in the novel. But he's asked to take on this documentary about this cult and just interview like former like cult members and stuff. And the main character is kind of down on his luck. He's kind of struggling by, but the offer that he gets to make this documentary is basically too good to pass up. So he takes it on, and he has his friend with him, Dan. Kyle is the main character, Kyle Freeman. So Kyle and his friend Dan, who works with him on these documentaries, they basically set out to interview, the members that the man has selected for them. And as they're interviewing the members of this former cult, things start to happen. Like, it's clear that this cult, and whoever looks into it, it's clear that this cult is cursed. And the more they look into it, the more they get the sense that they're being like watched or followed, or something is happening to them. And it's a very good, like, slow paced, because it certainly is slow paced. When I was looking at the reviews for this book, some people were complaining that it was like too slow, or that nothing happens, which I completely disagree with. A bunch happens in this book. It's just a very slow build, very slow, like, thriller horror story. I think I would definitely classify it as definitely like psychological horror, even, because the main character throughout the course of the story just grows more and more paranoid. And again, it's clear that something is following him, something is messing with him, and it seems like supernatural in nature. And you learn more about this cult, and it's almost like this Manson style cult, but also not really. It's very interesting, like, when you learn more about this cult, and also just the crazy stuff that starts happening to them along the way. But I thought this was really good. If you prefer like a more like slower paced, like slow build horror story, this would be like perfect for you. I thought, the pacing is slow, but it works. I don't mind if like the pacing in a book is slow, as long as like stuff is happening, or there's stuff that's happening or being said that contributes to the plot, then I'm fine with it, and that definitely happens with this book. The characters, I felt, were very, very well written. Specifically, Kyle and his friend Dan. Like, some of their conversations they would be having, like, one of them would like tell a joke, or they would say something, and I was like, yeah, that I feel like that's how me and my best friend would talk, so the dialogue was very good, very, like, realistically written. I thought that the characters were very well developed, and I thought that, the entity, or what is following them, I think they're called friends. Catherine, who is the leader of the cult, Catherine's friends is what they're referred to a lot of the time, and it's very, very, very creepy, very well written, very detailed. It was very chilling at times. Like, there was times where I was reading this like by myself, and I got kind of paranoid that something was watching me and stuff. So very good. So if you're starting with Adam Neville, I don't know if I'd say you should start with this one, but I would certainly recommend it. So Last Days by Adam Neville. All right, next up is The Girl Who Played with the Ouija Board by William Malmborg. Now, William Malmborg is an author that I really haven't seen like many people on YouTube talk about. I haven't really seen a lot of reviews for his works. If you try to find William Malmborg's books in, say, a Barnes & Noble, I mean, you won't find any of his works in a Barnes & Noble, and I think you probably have a really hard time finding his works in even like a used bookstore. He's definitely more of an indie author. Even though his books, his most popular book is Jimmy, that has, I think, over like 1,000 reviews, or maybe even more than that at this point, so he's certainly out there, but it just seems like he's a very sort of underground author for some reason. But I've read about 3 of his works. This was my 3rd book that I read by him, and my most recent one that I read by him. So it's the title would tell you one thing about the book, but it ends up being something very different. So basically, the main character, whose name is Penny, you find out that before the school year starts, she plays with a Ouija board. She kind of messes around with a Ouija board with like other people from school, and something happens to her, and it gets spread around the internet and stuff. And then as the story goes on, like, she starts experiencing other stuff, and you don't know if it's actually supernatural in nature or if it's like something else, if she's like got some sort of mental illness, or if it's another thing. And then eventually you actually find out what it is, and when you find out what it is that's messing with her, it's very, very twisted, very disturbing, just very, very dark, which is pretty typical for William Malmborg. The best way that I would describe William Malmborg is, this is gonna sound bad to say, but I mean it in the best way possible. I would describe William Malmborg as like a trashy version of Clive Barker, in that a lot of his books, like, his books are always very like sexual in nature. At least the ones that I've read so far, they're very sexual, but they're also very twisted and dark. That's really the best way I would describe William Malmborg. But his books are so much fun, to read. Now, I will say again, kind of like I said with Bentley Little, but if you are looking for like more of a literary based, like, an author who writes with really good prose and whatnot, which, by the way, I forgot to mention, Adam Neville would actually serve that purpose, because Adam Neville I would consider to be more of a literary horror author. But if you're looking for that, I can definitely tell you now, William Malmborg is not the author for you. Definitely not the author for you. The thing about William Malmborg is that a lot of people are very divided on his works. People either like his stuff or they hate his stuff. And one of the common criticisms of his work is that the writing sometimes can be a little bit amateurish or choppy or whatever. I can certainly see that, but it works for the type of stories that he writes. And most of the stories that he writes, again, from what I've read, they are usually very, very graphic and dark and twisted. Always a good amount of like gross out horror and gore, and again, a lot of like sexual stuff going on. So it works for the style of stories that he does. So if you're just looking to have a really good fun time and read like a really fucked up story, then this William Malmborg is the author for you. If you don't mind writing that isn't necessarily the best, then William Malmborg is for you. Now, that's not to say that I think that his writing is bad. I don't think the writing is bad. You know, I'm not going to say that it's like the best writing ever, but again, it serves the purpose and it works for the types of stories that he writes. But again, very good book. The characters, I heard some people say that they thought the characters weren't very well developed or fleshed out. And while these characters aren't necessarily characters that are going to stick with you until the end of time, I felt that the characters were very, very realistic. And when I say realistic, it's very realistic to how people act in modern days, and in modern times especially. Most of the characters in this book are teenagers, and I felt like the teenagers were written very, very well. Like, I think the author is on the younger side. Like, I've read books before where, like, older authors try to write, like, younger people in the more modern day, and it just doesn't really work. Like, you can tell that some of the older authors who try to do that really aren't really in lingo with how more younger people today act. But William Malmborg, I think, certainly is, because the teenagers in this book came across as, like, very, very authentic to how, like, you know, teenagers today would probably act, you know. So I really enjoyed that. And, you know, there's a lot of twisted, like, family stuff in this book too, which is also really fucked up, that you find out more about later on in the book. But I mean, just very dark, very disturbing. I would honestly say, if you're sensitive to certain topics, maybe steer clear from William Malmborg. But again, if you don't have sensitivities to that type of stuff, and you're looking for something that really, again, really disturbing. And I would say that, some people say that his work doesn't really have much meaning. I kind of disagree. I think that a lot of William Malmborg's works, at least the ones that I've read, they really do kind of explore how dark and creepy and disturbing and kind of, frankly, evil human beings can be and the human mind can be, and I think that's what a lot of his books do. It may not be in a very literary way, but I still think that it kind of serves that purpose and that lesson. So definitely check this one out. I would recommend you start with Jimmy. That was the first one that I read, and if you read that one, I think that you'll come to a pretty good decision on whether you'll like his work going forward or not. So I would start with Jimmy, but this one certainly isn't a bad one to start with either. So The Girl Who Played with the Ouija Board. Okay, number 4. I think that's the sequence I've been going in. So number 4 is Haunted: The Devil's Doorway by Lee Mountford. Now, Lee Mountford is an author that I discovered actually around this time last year. My partner got me one of his books for Christmas, actually. And it was the first book in the Haunted series, which is one series that Lee Mountford has. He has multiple series that he writes in, but this is one of them. This is book 2. So the first book that I read, it was Haunted Perrin Manor. And I felt that the first book was good. It was a good little haunted house novel, not great, but good. I felt like it was a little bit too cliche. I felt like that it kind of felt like a lot of the other more like haunted house novels that you read. And I didn't feel that the characters were I didn't feel that they were one-dimensional. I also didn't feel like they were really that fleshed out, so I didn't really find myself caring a lot about the characters. I did, but at the same time, it was just I could take them or leave them. But the end of the book was interesting enough and good enough to where I wanted to continue, and I'm glad that I did, because the second book, The Devil's Door, it really, really picks things up and takes it to the next level. It really, really improves on the first book. Now, I don't know if I said it already, this is actually a prequel to the first book. It kind of sets up, it shows you what leads to the events in the first book, and then subsequently, the events in the first book happen that gets the rest of the series rolling. But this one kind of takes you back and gives you the lore of the house and what happened in it that would start the events in the main series. But this one was very, very good. The way that Lee Mountford writes the entities and the specters and the ghosts is like nothing I've read before. He really, really gets into the descriptions of these ghosts, and it is fucking creepy. It is horrifying. I don't usually get scared by entities or ghosts written in books, but Lee Mountford creeps me the hell out with these specters that he writes. He does a phenomenal job with it. The characters in this book this time around were much more, I felt, developed and fleshed out, and they definitely had a lot of depth to them. One of the main characters, the husband, because it's a husband and wife, and the daughter Chloe, who ends up being one of the main characters in the first book, and something happens to Chloe at the end of the first book, and that is kind of explained in this book, but it also explains the other daughter, Sarah, who is the main character going forward in the series from book 3 forward, and how she came to be. And you find out that, I don't want to say too much because I don't want to spoil it, but you find out what's going on with her. But there's a case of possession in this book, and it's done very well, because you can tell that the character who's being possessed because sometimes they'll snap out of it, and there is one point where they completely snap out of it and they come back to reality, but then they get sucked right back in, and the way that they start to deteriorate physically also is very well described. But it's just and the husband is because basically what happens is his wife, the owner of this building, is this really, really creepy kind of slimy dude, and he immediately starts to kind of put the moves on his wife, but for a purpose, for a certain purpose, and his wife starts to basically fall under his spell. And you see the husband trying to get her to come back to reality and he's like slowly losing his wife. And it's really, really devastating to read because you really feel for this guy. And I thought that was really well written, the dynamic between the husband and the wife, and like the creepy nature of the owner, and just all the characters in general were really well done. The one criticism that I would give this book, though, is the way that the daughter was written. Now, Chloe in this book, I believe, is 6 years old. And to me, she came off like she might have been like 12, honestly. Like, I didn't feel that it was a very believably written child character. It just did not come off like a 6-year-old. This does take place, and by the way, I forgot to mention, Lee Mountford is a British author, I believe. So, this takes place in the UK, so it's possible that, and this takes place, I believe, in the 1980s, so, yeah, 1982. So, it's possible that maybe, like, children back then, and in the UK, maybe, like, the education system was advanced and good enough that maybe children did sort of act that way, more mature and grown up than children normally are. That's kind of how I tried to rationalize it. But even then, that was like the one major criticism I had, was whenever we got a perspective from Chloe, it didn't feel like a 6-year-old talking. It felt like maybe a 12-year-old, again, like I said. So that would be my only major criticism, but everything else in this book worked. Again, the pacing was very good. Like, it was very compulsively readable. I did not want to put this down, so very, very good. And the events that happen at the end are just insane, absolutely crazy. There's a lot of gore, a lot of very detailed gore in the end. So if you're sensitive to that type of stuff, then definitely don't read this. But if that's not going to bother you, then definitely check this one out, because at the end there is a massacre. The massacre of 1982 told in full, and it's definitely a massacre. So. And it's the specters that are like killing the people. Like, these are specters that can actually like do you real harm. So very, very good. Again, definitely start out with book 1. And like I said, book 1 isn't necessarily, it's not the greatest of all time, but stick it out, get to book 2. It gets so much better, and it gets so good. So, Devil's Door by Lee Mountford. And number 5, last but certainly not least, is Stolen Tongues by Felix Blackwell. Now, Felix Blackwell is also another independent author. Most of these authors, well, not Bentley Little and Adam Neville, they're pretty established, but I know that Lee Mountford, William Mallenborg, and Felix Blackwell, they're all very much independent authors. This one has gotten pretty popular, though, and it's actually interesting. This book came to be from a contest that this author registered for. It was a contest-winning story on Reddit.com's horror community No Sleep, and he apparently won, and then that's how this book came to be. So he kind of started out on Reddit.com, which I thought was kind of interesting. But this book is basically about, and the main character's name is Felix. Now, this is based on something that did happen to Felix, the author, but he also throws in like fictional elements to it to give it more of a fictional slant, but at the same time it's also kind of true. But Felix and his wife go out to this cabin for kind of like a getaway, and for like a romantic getaway. And while they're there, they start experiencing like paranormal phenomena, and they start hearing sounds outside the cabin. And then eventually Faye, his wife, starts actually like getting into like going into these like types of trances, and starts like sleepwalking, and actually starts talking back to the voice that they're hearing outside. It's almost like I got the sense that it's like a Wendigo almost, but very, very creepy. At times, this book almost reminded me of this book almost reminded me at times of like the Paranormal Activity movies. If that, as funny as that sounds, it in the sense that there's this paranormal entity that's trying to grab onto Faye and possessing her, and there's a backstory to that too, but it's grabbing onto her and just trying to take complete control of her, and Felix is doing everything he can to fight this entity and get his wife back and stuff. And it's very good. The pacing is on point. There's a lot of dread. You feel the dread that Felix feels in this book as his wife just starts to descend more and more and more into this possession. Like, there will be brief periods of time where the possession will kind of wear off for a minute, and Faye will start to come back to herself, but then eventually the solution, because I know at one point they put her on medication, but then after a while the medication doesn't work and it wears off, and then the possession is back in full force. And just like the way that Felix Blackwell, the way he describes the possession and some of the things that the wife in this book does, very, very creepy. Again, very, very Paranormal Activity-esque. And when I say Paranormal Activity, I mean, I'm more referring to like the first movie, the very first movie, not so much like all the other movies, but more like the first movie. Again, in the sense that there's like a possession, and the possession is happening to the wife, and there's a very much a lore and backstory to it. Very creepy. I know at one point in the book, the husband goes back to the cabin just by himself, and this thing starts tormenting him, and it's this figure outside, and it's trying to get in, and it's I love the suspense and the atmosphere. This book is very atmospheric, and I love it. It's so good, so awesome. Definitely, like, this book definitely, it was everything that I was hoping for. Like, a lot of the times you go into a book, and it's not what you were expecting, and that's not always a bad thing. You know, a lot of times that's a good thing. But I was expecting a certain thing with this, and I got it, and it was awesome, and it was amazing. There's also some Native American lore in this book that's put in, because at one point he gets into contact with what's his name? It's a friend, or at least it's a friend of a friend who is Native American and knows about these types of entities. And we meet these characters, and I thought that they were really well written. And I know at the end, Felix, the author, basically wrote that, you know, he wanted to write those characters in a way that wasn't like, you know, in a complete stereotype, but also in a way that didn't completely like disregard, you know, the lore and the mythology and the culture and whatnot. And I felt that he did a really good job of that. I felt like that those characters were very knowledgeable about it, while at the same time they just came across as like normal everyday people that take part in hobbies that like you or I would take part in. So I felt that he did a really good job with that. Obviously there was some backlash for it, and you know what, honestly, and I don't want to get like, you know, I don't want to get like political or anything, but like, we all know there's a subsection of people out there that are going to be offended no matter what. So you can't really do much about those people. So, but I just felt like Felix Blackwell did a good job with that too. So just all around, very, very good. Again, Felix Blackwell basically is himself that he's writing about, because again, this is based on a true story, but he also put in some, you know, he also put some fictionalized stuff in here as well. So it was based on a true story, but also somewhat fictionalized as well, if I remember correctly. Either way, though, very good book, very phenomenal book. I would highly recommend you check this out. So, and yeah, those are the top 5 horror books that I read this year in 2022. Let me know some books that you read this year, some horror novels that you read this year, maybe some recommendations for me. I'd definitely like to know. And yeah, so that is it for this one. Peace. You guys have a good day, and have a very, very Merry Christmas, Happy Holiday, whatever you celebrate, and definitely have a Happy New Year. Peace.